Wednesday, May 15th. It is National Police Recognition Day today, Memorial Day, and we've had certainly our share of trauma around police officers and firefighters killed in our area. Those three folks from Burnsville, Matthew Ruge and Paul Elmquist, and Adam Finseth, the firefighter that were killed. And that memorial service, you remember, was on the 28th of February at Grace Church. It was just really a spectacular event, but it's something everybody wishes we hadn't held. I think it was, the whole state seemed to be filled with grief over the loss of those three people due to that violence that befell them. And there's been a lot of incidents involving first responders, higher incident, I think, of injury and death than we've ever seen in the country. So just wanted to note that as we begin the meeting today. So call the meeting to order, and we've got a form of agenda in front of us.
Move approval, Anderson.
All right. Member Anderson. All right. Got a motion and a second to approve the meeting agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have a meeting agenda in front of us. It's approved. I just want to make a quick note, too, that Tom Wolf has joined us today, as has Sora Jost, the alternates from Scott County, and Tim Marino's here, too?
Yeah, he just
Okay, welcome. There you go. A little out of my peripheral vision.
Yeah.
So.
Sneaking in here.
All right. Thanks for being here, all of you alternates, sharing this responsibility that we all have.
Mr. Chair, may I interrupt just for a second?
Sure.
Follow up on Police Week. For those of you who would like to attend, there is the Honor Guard at the Police Memorial at the St. Paul Capitol Grounds. I believe starts today at 1 o'clock. We'll go for 24 hours. If you want to join me, I'll be there for Reek Lane at 5:30, and it's just up the street. And it is National Police Week, and we'll honor those fallen officers and any fallen officer or emergency responder killed in the line of duty.
Thank you for that, Member Dugan. And I think many cities and maybe some of the counties had their own recognition events this week. We did one on Monday at Edina City Hall with a flag raising ceremony and some comments. So,
And at that funeral at Grace Church, there were over 8,000 in attendance. That was amazing.
yeah, it was full, and people standing outside too.
Yes.
And so, let's see, we can move on now to the public. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to address the tab on a matter of concern to them? Certainly welcome to do so. Okay, no one coming forward. We can move on to the various reports that we have. You know, it's not too often we get to do this. We didn't have an exec committee meeting, so there wouldn't be anything to report out from that today. And with the legislature in the last week of session, it doesn't look like anything's going to be happening on Metropolitan Council governance with respect to changing the model. It's be at the 11th hour, and certainly that's not going to happen. It didn't really even come up during the session. And I don't think Holberg was even surprised about that. It didn't come up, having led the Blue Ribbon panel a few years ago and did such good work on that.
It's a hot stove many of us have touched many times, and we don't learn our lesson.
It's an interesting way to put it. So nothing happening there. A lot of things affecting other levels of government over there, including cities that we're keeping a close eye on. And we don't get to do this very often, is recognize one of our own. And I would encourage all of you, if there are folks that we should be recognizing that are our colleagues here, we should be doing that. And I wanted to just do a shout out for Peter Dugan and give him hearty congratulations from the tab. Peter Dugan was named the 2023 Minnesota Recreation and Parks Association, that's the MRPA, Board and Commissioner Award recipient for the entire year. They're only the sole recipient. So congratulations, Mr. Dugan. At the press release from the City of Eagan, it says Chair Dugan was selected through a committee scoring process that included peers from across the state who have improved the field of parks and recreation through volunteerism or support. Chair Dugan has served 10 consecutive years on the Sustainable Eagan Advisory Commission, including several years as the commission chair and 10 years prior on the Advisory Planning Commission. during his time on the SEAC. The SEAC has supported parks and recreational activities by advocating for sustainability efforts such as increased pollinator gardens, EV vehicle usage, water conservation, and many other things. So he received his award in January at the MRPA annual meeting hosted in the city of Maple Grove. So again, congratulations, very nice honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that's it for me. And then we're going to go to agency reports. And Member Sahibjam is with us from MnDOT. And
Yes. Thank
Connie,
you.
go ahead.
Yeah.
I bet.
Good afternoon. I don't have a whole lot to share, but one thing is it's construction season, and I would ask for your help to help remind the public that we're doing this for them and not to them. And it's going to look beautiful when it's done, and appreciate people's patience, especially in the beginning when you detour traffic, go down from 3 to 2, sometimes to 1 lane. It can be tough, and especially the very first few days, we had a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls, very upset people. But no matter how much you communicate, you try to let people know about things, then people get surprised. But anyway, any help from any of you to communicate that, don't be like them now. Help us and say that it's all going to be good. So
Hey, Connie,
we try our best. Yeah.
Mayor.
if I may add, I drove in today. I left early because I figured 494 was going to be a little slow. I drove 60 all the way through 494. I don't know that I've ever done that. Or the lane shifts, everything was working just fine. I was dumbfounded. I was here.
And
at
that is the
noon.
biggest project for folks. That's down 494, Bloomington and Richfield, $390 million. Biggest project that MnDOT's ever taken. That's doing, we've had other big design build projects, but nothing that big. So that'll be a couple of years of disruption, but
I'm sure that was a one and done. It probably won't happen again.
no. We're going to start phase 2 east of 35 all the way to 77, and soon after this one. So Edina is happy.
Yeah, I was in one of those meetings this morning, not for you, not to you meetings at 50th in France, involving the E-line, the proposed E-line, and the construction schedule for 50th in France didn't look like it was going to be good for business, but I think we got some good work done with the Met Council this morning, so. Anything else?
No.
All right, anything for Member Sahibjam as a result of that report? All right, let's move on then to, we have somebody here, is Member Kolash here? Oh, and Member B1, I didn't see Todd anywhere. All right, we'll hold until they show up. Last time, I think Frank came, but he was a little bit late. We'll turn to Member Crimmins and get a report on the airport.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not too much to report, except Aer Lingus is going to fly to Dublin 4 times a week, and Delta's announced daily flights to Dublin. And I didn't know Dublin was such a hub, but I guess talking with Brian Ricks, our CEO, he said there's a lot of international connections in Dublin. So if you get to Dublin, you have a lot more choices to travel. But then along with MnDOT, you got to make sure you leave enough time to get to the airport, because there's construction work on 62, 55, and 494. So they more or less have us surrounded. So depending on the time of day and the weather, you just got to leave enough time for yourself. But as far as passengers, we've now met or exceeded the 2019 level of passengers going through the airport. And we have more international flights now than we've ever had. And I think mostly due to Sun Country. They've exploded, and they've added a lot of international destinations. So we have more international flight choices now, and we're going to have more passengers than before the pandemic. So it looks like travel's back, and everybody seems to want to travel. So that's all I have to report on, Mr. Chair.
All right, very good. Member Crimmins, any questions or comments relative to that report? All right, let's turn to our colleague Deb Barber and get a Met Council update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick things today. We just got at Transportation Committee on Monday our first ridership report for 2024. So for Q1 of 2024, so far, it's almost 12.5 million rides in the first quarter, which is it's almost 1.4 million more than this time period last year. So we are continuing to see increased ridership across just about all modes. Overall, it's a 13% increase over 2024, but we're seeing definite increases, I would say, in bus service, which is over 15% from last year. And of significant interest to this group is the ABRT routes, or the bus rapid transit, are up 31% from last year. So we brought the D line, obviously big, but we're seeing that trend kind of continue and keep going, which I think is pretty profound. We're also starting to see some increase in our express ridership, which is up 16%. So that'll be something we'll be monitoring going into the future to see if and when some of that ridership starts to come back. And then the other thing is we have our final transportation policy plan working group meeting this Friday. I want to thank again everyone from TAB who's participated with that, and anyone who's reviewed chapters or looked at things and all of that. We're really making great work and great strides in that entire effort, and I really just want to thank my colleagues for helping out.
Right, good. Questions for Member Barber? One thing I think would be, from that meeting I had this morning, one piece of information would be helpful, I think, for the merchants down at 50th and France as they think about weeks of one lane on France Avenue or closures periodically on 50th would be, what were the ridership projection increases for the E-line so that they know that the gain is worth the pain? Because there's some projection. I think you probably looked at that carefully at the council level before you'd made that E-line determination or any ABRT determination.
Yeah, we definitely did, and I can bring that information or send you some information so you've got some talking points on it. Because if you look at even the D-line, yes, the ABRT route did itself brought ridership, but it actually brought a lot of new riders, people who didn't ride before, into that corridor. So, and we've seen some of the local routes still there actually continue to do well at the same time. So we're seeing that in general with trends with our ABRT lines, but I can definitely get some information pulled together for you specifically on that.
That'd be helpful. Good.
Yeah, so the to Connie's comments of we're doing this for, not to you, is helpful information.
Yep.
So we'll get you some.
And regardless whether it's 50th in France and a commercial node there, or 44th in France, or anywhere else you're going to do a ABRT line, one of the issues that came up this morning was, could there be I'll call it a mitigation fund established so that, if you had hard data from merchants about how their business had been impacted, could federal monies be used in part for that purpose of creating a mitigation fund? And maybe you can do some research on that as well.
Yeah, we can definitely look into it. I would say Katie Roth, who leads our ABRT program, has already reached out and asked and let me know that that was one of the questions. So we'll look into it. I don't know if that's possible, but no different than what we're working on with the anti-displacement efforts for the Blue Line and that kind of program that we're been working on in partnership with Hennepin County is similar principles, I think, that we'll be applying to projects like ABRTs as well. And so it's a good opportunity for us to look at, even the experiences over the summer, so we can figure out more lessons learned to apply those to new projects as we go forward. But our intention is to stay very active with the business community along there to try and minimize the impacts as much as possible.
Yep. The reason I raised it was, well, it was raised this morning at the meeting by somebody, but then I got to thinking about, I think maybe it was 10, 15 years ago, Connie, when MnDOT did 169 through St. Peter. You had a mitigation fund there to help the merchants because you basically kind of shut down business on Main Street in St. Peter, and they had a fund there to try to help them out and get through that construction season. So not unprecedented, and that was probably federal money as well. Okay, let's move on then to Suburban Transit Authority update from Member Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, just a couple of quick updates. Maple Grove Transit, MyRide microtransit service capacity and hours were expanded effective May 1st, and that will assist in reducing trip denials and in providing a wide variety of trip purposes, and it'll be especially beneficial in providing employment-based trips. Minnesota Valley Transit Authority Connect microtransit ridership is up 31%, a figure we've already heard, over a year ago. Which is at its highest level ever. And Plans are to add vehicles to expand the service further into Prior Lake in Shakopee by late this year or early next year. And that's my report.
Very good. Complete your report? Member Hanson, that's okay, thank you. Any questions for Member Hanson? All right, let's move on to Chair Hager, see if it was a TAC report. No. She's nodding her head negatively, so we'll bring her up here momentarily. We've got minutes in front of us from April 17, 2024.
Second.
Got a motion, Member Anderson, second, Commissioner Gattel on approving the April 17, 2024 minutes as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the minutes of April 17, 2024 as published, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Minutes are adopted. Thank you. We've got a couple of items on the consent agenda, and actually one of them, I think, Member Sahibdam, you wanted to remove 2024-25. Is that correct?
Yes, dash 25, and good news is we're going to be changing the cost to much lower cost of $750,000.
You hold those thoughts, but you want to remove 2025?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to remove an item from the consent agenda? All right, let's go back then to 2024-23 and bring up Chair Hager to walk us through that one.
All right, good afternoon, Chair and members of the board. 2024-23 is a streamlined TIP amendment to the 2024 to 2027 TIP to add 2 new projects. Both projects are MnDOT projects, and neither project is funded from the regional solicitation. The first is for the design of a project on Minnesota Highway 65 between 37th Avenue and I-694 in Columbia Heights and Hilltop. The total project cost is $4 million over 4 years, funded with both federal and state funds. And the second is for a bituminous mill and overlay along Minnesota Highway 316 from US Highway 61 in Welch Township to Tuttle Avenue in Hastings, including the addition of turn lanes at various locations. The total project cost is $11.8 million, funded with NHPP and HSIP funding, and TAC unanimously recommends approval of these TIP amendments.
Very good. Questions for Chair Hager on that particular item on 2024-23? Is there a motion to adopt the 2024-23?
So moved, Jepson.
Jepson moves. There a second? Mayor seconds. All right, we got any further conversation? All those in favor of adopting 2024-23 as recommended, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then, Member Sahibdam, I'll let you lead out on 2024-25.
Yes, and that is a 6 NEVI projects. Basically, the cost on that is going to drop. We're reducing that by quite a bit to a total of $750,000 from $1.3 million.
All right, and this is, Chair Hager, do you have any comment on this particular item?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2024-25 is an amendment to add 6 new projects in the TIP. They're MnDOT projects to install new electric vehicle charging infrastructure using the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula funding. The proposed locations align with the 2023 Minnesota Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan, which is focused on the alternative fuel corridors of I-94 and I-35. There are 18 locations statewide, and 6 of those are within the Metro MPO area and need to be added to the 2024 to 2027 TIP. TAC unanimously recommends approval of these items.
All right, very good, thank you. Questions for Chair Hager or Member Sahibdam? Yes, Member Martinson.
Thanks. I just have a quick question for Member Sahibdam. So there's the other amounts of the funding that are listed here. It's not clear where those are coming from. Are those coming from a variety of sources, or are they identified yet or yet to be identified? So some of it's coming from the NEVI funding, right?
It is.
That part's obvious, but then there's some sort of substantial amounts that are for each of these coming from other, and it's not, I'm never clear what the others ever are.
What other is?
Yeah.
I will need help on that.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't trying to be problematic.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and members. So the other sources you're referring to?
Yeah.
The other sources are intentionally vague because they're going to be,
Could you stand a little closer to the microphone, please?
Yeah, the state will be partnering with private entities, so they're not sure about the other sources So it's just generally ambiguous. That's what we received from MnDOT.
Okay.
To be identified.
So it's intentionally ambiguous. Okay, as long as the intention is clear, I'm satisfied. Thanks.
Mr. Chair,
Mayor?
I asked the same question at our prep meetings, is about, they show all these at exit points, but, and I think you might have answered that, so you're partnering with businesses that are on these exit points to put these facilities there, or are they gonna be standalone? How does that work, or what is that plan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And member, so MnDOT is going to be partnering with private entities, and that's what we've been told from Casey Stanek, who's the grants manager on this project. Then that's as much as we know on this at the moment.
Is something like that put out for bids? I mean, say you exit it and there's 4 gas stations there, how do you determine where they go and who do they go to? How does that, is that an open bid type system then? Because I would think that there's benefits, because you have to sit there and, you know, for what, a half hour, 20 minutes to charge your battery, whatever it might be, or longer, I don't know. But I was just wondering how does that work?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And member, so Casey Stanek, I was just talking with her before the meeting. So they receive applications from, gas stations that have these amenities, so, because it does take a moment to charge your electric vehicle. So they're taking those applications in from those gas stations with those amenities in these cluster groups.
Thank you.
Any questions? So we've got a new category now, the intentional versus the unintentional. Thanks for that. All right. Does somebody care to move 2024-25?
So moved. Jenkins.
Jenkins moves. Member Jenkins moves. Is there a second?
Amended.
All right, we got a motion.
As amended, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I want to clarify that. I think, does the motion include for that first project cost to change?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Mr. Rogo. All right. I think we got the microphones working a little bit better now. We got a motion and a second on 2024-25. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of 2024-25 as recommended, including that cost variance, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. 2024-25 is adopted. And now we'll move on to items on the non-consent portion of the agenda. And the first item there is 2024-20. And Chair Hager is going to come up and walk us through that one as well, which is a Washington County project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2024-20 is a program year extension request for Washington County's CSAH 17 and Minnesota Highway 36 intersection improvement project. Washington County was awarded $10 million in the 2020 regional solicitation for the CSAH 17 and Minnesota Highway 36 interchange project in program year 2025. The county has been conducting community engagement and working through the evaluation of various design alternatives. However, with the work that remains, they have determined they will be unable to deliver the project in the 2025 program year and are asking for a one-year extension to 2026. Per the current program year extension policy, project sponsors must receive a score of 7 points to be eligible for an extension. This process helps to ensure that project sponsors have made enough progress on their projects that they will be able to successfully deliver the project with that extension. The Washington County project received a score of 5. However, since the TAC meeting, Washington County has secured the equivalent of municipal consent from both Lake Elmo and Grant. This major milestone would result in the project receiving the minimum required score of 7. TAC unanimously recommends approval of this program year extension.
All right, our colleague, Commissioner Karwoski just joined us. Commissioner Karwoski, 2024-20 is a Washington County project. It's an extension of a program year TAC approved unanimously. Do you care to move the matter?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to approve as submitted, the extension.
Second, Gotel.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any further conversation with respect to 2024-20? All those in favor of adoption of Resolution 2024-20 as stated, as recommended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. 2024-20 is adopted. 2024-21 is a TIP amendment. And turning back to Chair Hager.
2024-21 is a TIP amendment for a regionally significant project for MnDOT project to expand US Highway 10 from 2 lanes to 3 lanes in Coon Rapids. Regionally significant is defined as a project that adds expansion or is a major transit way, something that would show up in the regional model. And that is why this is not a streamlined TIP amendment. The project must be approved and added into the TIP after a 21-day public comment period. The total project cost is $40.5 million, funded with federal, state, and corridors of commerce funding, and it is represented in the Regional Transportation Policy Plan. TAC unanimously recommends that TAB release for public comment MnDOT's regionally significant 2024 to 2027 TIP amendment to include the US 10 expansion project.
Mr. Chair,
Questions
move
from
to
council?
approve.
Yes.
Second.
Commissioner Jepson moves. Member Jenkins seconds the adoption of 2024.
Guys.
Was it Geisler? Okay, excuse me. 2024-21. I'm glad you caught that because I wasn't looking up. I thought I heard Member Jenkins' voice. All right, we've got a motion and a second on 2024-21. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of 2024-21 as recommended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. On to 2024-22, which is a Metro Transit scope change request.
2024-22, a scope change request for Metro Transit's Regional Mobility Hubs project, and I'll just acknowledge at the outset that this is also a cooperative project with the City of Minneapolis. I'm here as TAC Chair. I'm also a Minneapolis employee. I just want to acknowledge those two hats. We do have staff here from Metro Transit and additional staff from Minneapolis if there are questions, and I know there were questions on this one in some of the prep meetings. Metro Transit was awarded $1.6 million in the unique projects category in the 2022 regional solicitation to implement 7 mobility hubs in Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, St. Paul, and Maplewood. The scope change is to move the locations of 2 of the mobility hubs in Minneapolis and to shift budget from technology elements to multimodal elements. The site location changes include moving the hub proposed at Central Avenue and 26th Avenue Northeast to Central Avenue and 14th Avenue Northeast, roughly 1 mile south. This new site is on a city-owned lot with better connections overall to the Metro F line. Moving the hub proposed at Penn Avenue North and Lowry Avenue North to 26th Street West and Nicollet Avenue. This is the second location change. This results in moving the mobility hub from the north side of Minneapolis to a location that is south of downtown. The new hub location is along the Route 18, which is one of the busiest local bus routes, and it's also a future ABRT route. The change is driven, these changes are driven by a few things, primarily the need for enough space to accommodate the footprint of the hubs themselves, and preferably on city-owned lots with adequate access for them to be maintained. The hub locations are also proposed where there are strong connections to transit, and the locations consider community demographics with a focus on disadvantaged communities. So knowing that there were concerns raised at some of the prep meetings, I want to note that these federally funded mobility hubs with the unique projects funding complement investments in mobility hubs that Minneapolis is already making with our local funds and our local program. Our local funded projects are a smaller footprint, and there will be some of those on the north side of Minneapolis. So these federally funded hubs have a larger footprint, and finding an alternate location in North Minneapolis that fit that footprint and had the access that was needed proved to be not possible. The budgetary changes come from refinement of scope during project development. So as a result of the 3 of the 4 hubs being along ABRT routes and the 4th hub along a future ABRT route, the mobility hubs do not need to include the technology elements like real-time signage. So the project team is proposing instead to utilize these funds to build out the multimodal infrastructure necessary for the success of the hubs. TAC unanimously recommends approval of the requested scope change with no reduction in federal funding.
Very good. Questions for Chair Hager on this matter, 2024-22? All right, is there a motion to adopt?
We got a question.
Oh, yes.
Several.
Member Bradley, go ahead. Oh,
You're Brad.
Member Johnson.
Bradley was first. Oh.
Okay, Member Johnson?
Brad.
Which one's, who was first? Member Bradley was first, okay.
I would just like to, I guess, bring up some of the comments or suggestions or concerns that were discussed with the TAC committee earlier this week. So one of the things that was pointed out is that you're moving this hub from North Minneapolis and placing it in South Minneapolis. And we discussed so for the TAC, we're working to increase access to transportation options. And this seems to be counter to that for that neighborhood and for that part of the community. And we wanted to know if there was actual community input. I know for some of the comments that were displayed during our meeting, it said that it was kind of driven by two people, one city council and the chief of police. But it did not state anything about actually going out into the community and asking people if it was okay or if they're fine with not having this type of transportation option in that area. And I just want to state that we cannot keep denying options for this segment of the population, because we've seen this occur with other things, whether it's healthcare, education, employment, things like that, and has not had a positive outcome for the state. And if we continue to not apply federal funds to projects for this part of Minneapolis, then there's going to be consequences.
All right, thank you for that comment. I think we've got some folks that want to help respond to that. Those two concerns I think you've expressed is, why moving it, and are we shortchanging some of the folks in our community, broader community, when we make some of these changes? So, and then community input I think was also important.
Yes, and let me write that down. Thank you, Mr.
Would you
Chair.
identify yourself too, please?
My name is Meredith Klikatka. I'm the Shared Mobility Program Manager for Metro Transit, and I'm the Project Manager for the Regional Mobility Hub through this solicitation, and I'm joined by Dylan Freed with the City of Minneapolis, so hopefully we'll be able to field all the questions. Thank you for your comment. I will reiterate a couple of things that Chair Hager said. I think the impetus to remove the location in particular was coming from MPD and a local council member on the north side who was seeing behaviors like loitering and, I'm sorry, I have to go through here, drug dealing. And there was concerns about the behaviors that they couldn't address through the interventions that they tried. And so the result, I think, of that was a communication between each of the property owner, the city, and adjacent business owners, if I'm characterizing that correctly. And in the end, it was requested the removal of that mobility hub, which had been a pilot location, I believe, for a number of years through the City of Minneapolis's program, and was identified for a more permanent solution through the Regional Mobility Hub. Do you want to talk to community input?
I want to clarify briefly. Sorry, Dylan Freed, Minneapolis Public Works. I manage the mobility and curbside management programs. So this location of Penn and Lowry, we still have a mobility hub there, if you will. It was back in 2019 that we sited a parklet on some Hennepin County property at this site. And the decision a year ago was that Hennepin County, due to the security concerns, was going to fence off that site. And so they asked us to remove the parklet, but we still have the mobility hub elements there. But with this land not being available for enhanced elements as part of this project, we did not have the footprint necessary to have this be one of the regional locations.
Any follow-on, Member Bradley? Any follow-on questions as a result of those comments? Not right now. Okay, all right. And Member Johnson?
Thank you, Chair. I had some of the similar thoughts when I first saw the scope change request, because it looks like disinvestment in North, which of course I think we should all be attuned to when we have an area that is suffering from a lack of investment. Here's another example of this. I'm glad to hear that there was further discussion process. Again, I think community input is a really important angle to this too. I mean, I understand it's multiple partners. It's very challenging to get I can't remember how many sites there are, a lot of sites between a lot of different partners. And of course, the application was back in 2022. All that I want to acknowledge. One thing that you just said, though, I sparked my interest. Hennepin County said no to reopening this location for the mobility hub.
Chair and committee, we did not approach Hennepin County about utilizing their land. It was a decision that we made as the city for our Mobility Hub program that we did not want to cite, federally funded elements on property that we did not have, that was not part of our right-of-way or was not part of our city property.
Okay, so again, I think it's because there's lots of different jurisdictions. I wanted to clarify that particular item. When I heard it was fenced off, and then you said you weren't locating it there. So the other thing I will say is I'm glad that there are the other pilot sites for a complement to this, even if they're not the fully built out ones. I think that's important context to this. But again, I think at any time, sort of TAB itself sees these instances where we see disinvestment, I think we should always ask these follow-up questions of how did it get to this? What's the process? I think it's just something we need to look at. I mean, I would say the east side of St. Paul is another example. I'd be very sensitive to what's happening over there too for projects. So thank you for doing the additional digging on this, looking things up. And I would just flag maybe the last piece. I know Unique Projects 2022 was a very different system than it was in 2024. I think we've matured quite a bit, and that's thanks to the work group this year doing that work on it. I do think the scope change requests probably do need to have more attention paid like we are today, just because they are so unique for that process too. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Member Johnson. Member Marino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that there is a difference between the pilot programs and the federally funded one, like one is bigger. Is there any other difference between those two type of programs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say the main difference between the Minneapolis is that the pilot had been going on for a number of years to inform, I would say, more permanent interventions and multimodal elements. Think EV car share, which is a very big part of the program, inviting bike scooter companies in more permanent infrastructure in parking so that they become permanent drop sites. I do think that the thing that stood out about the Minneapolis pilot is the community ambassador program and the engagement, which we did continue on for the regional mobility hub program. So those will be included, and I would say those are kind of the more unique elements to it.
Okay, and then you also mentioned that there were other investments that are going to be happening in North Minneapolis. Where are those investments going to be located at for the mobility hubs?
Sure. I have a list. Thank you for your question. Give me 1 minute.
I got it.
Okay.
All right, yeah. So just to clarify, Chair and committee, our Mobility Hub program has been evolving over the past several years. It started off largely as a pilot project funded with some grant funds, but more and more we've been using local funds to expand it. Not all Mobility Hub sites are created equal. Some of them are larger regional ones, but our smaller ones, we've been expanding the number of those. I think we're up to about 60 this year. It's been growing by a dozen or so every year. What is a mobility hub? It's a little bit of both physical infrastructure and programmatic infrastructure. So of those 60 sites, many of them, several dozen, are in North Minneapolis. This year alone, we're adding 3 locations along Broadway and one at Highway 55 in Bryant, for instance. But there's already many more than that. The programmatic elements of the mobility hubs are still in place, where we're citing, bike parking infrastructure and ensuring that our shared mobility providers are providing vehicles at those locations. So we're continuing to invest, and we have a lot of interest in additional locations in North Minneapolis. It's just the footprint of those locations was not adequate for the types of improvements that we had as part of this project.
And when you say the footprint wasn't adequate, that's after Hennepin County fenced off that land?
For this site specifically, the original plan was to have the site to negotiate with Hennepin County to use part of that. But again, our city made a decision that we do not want to cite, infrastructure that we are purchasing and ensuring that it's going to be there, and space that's not our right-of-way or land that we own and control.
Okay.
Member Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. You addressed a little bit of it, but I want to get a little more detailed. So there are other mobility sites in the North Minneapolis area. What are we talking proximity, though, to the Penn and Lowry location? How much farther do I have to walk if this doesn't get developed?
Thank you, member. I actually don't know, we didn't do that level of analysis on what the walking distance would be in between the pilot sites and the Penn and Lowry location.
And to clarify, Penn and Lowry continues to be one of our mobility hub sites. We still have the signage, mode finding, things like that we have there. We still have our micro-mobility parking infrastructure, and we still ask our shared mobility providers to ensure vehicle availability there, so.
So if I can follow up?
Yes, Member Jenkins.
So then what is the distinction between a Minneapolis pilot site and a federally funded site? What is Penn and Lowry losing by moving the federal funds south of town?
Yep, sure. Thank you, member. So I think the scope for the sites themselves include EV car share charging. So the stations, the more permanent stations that will have 2 vehicles available for car share and 2 parking spots available for public charging. The other thing I would say is think like concrete pads for parking micromobility devices for the vendors to drop there. Some of the other amenities are the kind of more transit amenities that Dylan mentioned. So think wayfinding, transit, real-time transit information, and a lot of the real-time transit information and signage went in as part of the BRT project. So some of those amenities are still there and in a very permanent way that won't get removed.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Member Martinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is all helpful. A lot of this detail was not included in the transmittal to us, and so this is very helpful to have further details. The one thing that's not clear to me is whether any other sites in North were considered for this pilot before it was proposed to move it to South.
Yep, thank you, member. And yes, there was analysis. So this project is an implementation of the Regional Mobility Hub Planning Guide that Met Council produced. So there were a number of locations for local jurisdictions to select from that were considered, I would say, regionally significant. And they did look through all of those. I think ultimately 2 locations kind of bubbled up to the top on the north side as potential sites, and those were Emerson. So Penn and Broadway and Emerson were the 2 locations, but ultimately the footprint of the hub couldn't fit within a city-owned parcel. And I can tell you as the project manager implementing this, it's really hard to site permanent infrastructure on property the agency doesn't own. So I think ultimately the decision was 26th and Nicollet is a better fit for the needs of the program.
Thank you.
Any add-on, Member Martinson?
No, thanks.
Okay, all right. Other questions prompted? Commissioner Jepson. Oh, Member Morass.
Thank you, Chair. Growing up on the north side, I hate to see this losing, but I understand kind of the process. Looking at the county website, the county owns both the northwest and the northeast quadrant of this. Is there going to be further discussions with the county to try to get some city ownership and potentially bring this back to the north side?
Chair and committee, we're absolutely open to talking with the county on that. You know, if we start getting into like potential land acquisition, that's a whole different ballgame, right? And if they ever want to sell those sites for development, that may factor into their decision-making on that. But, you know, things like that, we're kind of determining are outside of the scope of a pilot project such as this. So, okay. But we're open to talking with them, so.
Commissioner Jepson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment to Member Martinson's point. This solicitation being the first one in 22, was it? I'm sorry, frankly, it was a hot mess. So I hope we have lessons learned from that initial project, and I think we're still feeling the pain from the dysfunction that really that process was, because to me, this no longer is the project we approved. This is a complete change of something that we approved, and I think in most situations, I would not be for that. I just think when we were going through this decision-making process, it was very challenging and very dysfunctional. So I will be supporting these changes, but I really hope we have learned some lessons here in that to overhaul, in my opinion, the entire scope of the project, the financing of the project, the location of the I mean, this is a lot of change. This is not the original project anymore. And I just find real frustration, and I can hear it in the questions here too, especially with zero community input. I find that fairly disappointing.
Thank you, Commissioner. That prompted anything else from any members? All right.
May I?
Yes. Member Chaudhary.
I wanted to kind of just like go back. I don't think there was zero community input, so there was engagement with the council member in their office about issues on that location, and I kind of wanted to reflect and back to you all to kind of maybe detail out a little bit about the community input that was received, and I know there were concerns around safety. If we can kind of highlight that, I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Member Chowdhury. I'll do my best, and then maybe Dylan, you can add in some elements. I think the initial request coming from MPD and council members for the location really drove the discussion around concerns that the community was seeing behaviors at that particular location. Like I think Dylan said, there is still hosted sites where shared mobility vendors can be on that property. But in terms of a more permanent location, I think that it did not work out ultimately. So I don't know.
Member Chaudhary, go
Yes,
ahead.
I'll just know as a
Could you pull one of those microphones
Yeah.
closer to yourself too, please?
As a council member representing a part of Minneapolis that has different transit nodes, like whenever there's a safety issue or just concerns about accessibility, we receive multiple calls, multiple emails, and I know that this was the case for council members on the north side and continue to be as we're discussing conversations around transit accessibility and safety. That's why in our last budget, we brought forward a transit safety coordinator in our Office of Community Safety. And around this conversation of disinvestment in different parts of north side, part of the disinvestment that we're working to address is having a multitude of services around public safety available to north siders that need immediate support or more proactive support in terms of making sure that community members have access to resources and are also diverted away from creating law violations. I also hear the tension in this room of like moving away a more permanent project on the north side because I want to continue to see more investment, especially as a south side council member. It's really important to me to bridge the south side, north side divide because we're one city. But I wanted to recognize that I appreciate that there's still going to be a version of the mobility hub there, and I do think like it is on this body for us in the future to consider like what other investments are necessary on the north side, and then how we can collaborate with our city, maybe proactively to think about the success of a project. I do feel like the engagement that was necessary from at least on the council end was sufficient to say, hey, we're a little concerned about this as permanent, and so I'll be supporting this as well, and I can move it for approval.
And can I speak?
Commissioner.
I just want to say that I'm disappointed that there was no communication in Hennepin County. It was talked among our colleagues up at on the 24th floor that we weren't brought into this because we certainly support, transit-oriented design. And while we might not have sold the whole parcel, we might sold a parcel of that to make that happen, but we were not contacted about it at all. So just so for the record, I want folks to know. We have a motion.
So we don't have a motion yet.
We have a motion, but not a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we could get a second.
Somebody have a question, or I want to ask a clarifying. Member Bradley, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, almost for thought, for the future. Like all neighborhoods, states, and other places will change and evolve with different people moving in and out. And since, you know, we have a new police chief and we'll have new ones in the future, there's a possibility that they will, you know, clean up this neighborhood or at least clean up this part of the area. And when there's a future kind of like special project, when you solicit for that and those funds, to consider putting something in that, either in that location if you're able to acquire more parcels or whatever, just for future thought.
Thank you, Member Bradley. Yes, this is the first implementation of these permanent locations, so we're really looking forward to that next iteration of what that looks like from the transit perspective too, because our hubs are unlike the Minneapolis hubs. They're more regional and more suburban in nature.
All right, we got a little technical glitch here. Let's clean this up. So Member Chowdhury made the motion. We don't have a second. Is there a second so we can continue the discussion a little bit more earnestly?
I'll second.
Thank you, Member Anderson. All right, and then Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As I listened to this discussion, it made me really start thinking about it, and Member Jepson brought up a good point, that it's complete change of what the original project was. How does it, and I get it, you know, I understand hearing the reasons why, but is this setting us up for something else in the future to say, well, that whole project and thing changed completely and we approved it, what happens on the next project? Do we, and I know a lot of this is by circumstance, but I think it's something we need to really think about, is the fact that it is a complete change of what was originally approved for.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm going to bring Chair Hager up to answer that question in a moment, but I'm going to go to first Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just, as somebody who has helped build out the Unique Projects program and then has scored it, vote for both times, I will agree, the first time we scored it, we didn't do it as well as we did it the second time, because we learned a whole lot the first time of how to do it better. I will say that the first time when we were doing these scorings, we were not looking at the exact ticky-tack details of where stations were going. We were looking at investing in 5 mobility hubs in Minneapolis or thereabouts, and adding those to the region because we felt that was a regionally significant value. We're still getting that here. In the essence of, not to jump down the agenda, scope change, other things, we're still getting what we bought effectively by getting 5 mobility hubs of the same substance in the area. Where they're located, I think we've had a lot of good discussion about that. I'm not to rehash that, but just to talk about the scoring and process for electing to apply funds to this through the regional solicitation process. Unique projects are different than everything else we're doing. That's why they have their own category. That's why we should be assessing them differently. I'm a little disappointed that we have this much change on a project that's supposed to be funded within 2 years. That's a lot. I think it's a good advice to say unique projects coming forward should maybe be baked a little bit better coming into it. That's another good learning that we can advise to applicants. But I really don't agree that we're not getting what we asked for, that the change in the project is totally different. We funded 5 mobility hubs with the money that we funded. We're getting 5 mobility hubs. They're still roughly geographically relevant. They're still on transit ways. We're still getting what we funded for. We can have a discussion about what scope changes are applied for unique or not, but unique projects are already going to be outliers no matter what we do. No matter what, no matter any unique projects that we've considered. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that appropriately, that these aren't just like every other project that we're doing when we're doing scope changes. These are always going to be considered on their own individual merits. Just like everything else when we do exceptions. So I just want to make that point clear of the process for the next time that we do in unique projects. The scoring is much more detailed now. We have better guidance. We will probably be able to be more specific about what we think is the project we bought versus not, if you will. But what we funded to the last cycle is 5 mobility hubs roughly in Minneapolis, and we're getting that.
You meant 7.
Is it 7? Sorry, math. Yes, 7.
We lost 2 in the conversation. You didn't mean to do that, I know that.
I did not mean to. But yes, we're getting the same number of hubs.
Yeah, all right.
Well,
Commissioner.
If I can just, and I share your distaste and got involved in the last round. It's still not perfect. But to the mayor's question, we're right now embarking on what the 26 solicitation's gonna look like and have a working group. We might not even have unique projects as a category in 26. So we have the opportunity before the next solicitation, given that the whole process is being reevaluated, to make changes.
All right, Chair Hager. Member Jenkins, do that first, then Chair Hager, stand by.
Okay, so I want to update my thoughts a little bit. Member Geisler, I agree with you that we're getting what we asked for as far as mobility hubs. I'm still not sold on supporting the full presentation, because the monies that came from the federal dollars for the technology are no longer needed in the new model. And so I'm not sure I can approve it with them maintaining the federal money. They're just using the federal money for other parts of the project, I get it, but isn't part of the special project was those were earmarked for technology. I don't know if it's earmarked per se, how much play we have with that money, but I'm not sold on them getting the federal money for technology they're not using anymore. So I'd need some more persuasion on that. Otherwise, I can't support it as proposed.
All right, I'm going to ask Chair Hager, was there anything akin to this conversation at the TAC?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, no. It was very straightforward at TAC. But I do want to say that I couldn't have said it better than Member Geisler in terms of why this looks different than what we're used to seeing. This is a unique project. If we had been moving a roadway reconstruction from Hennepin Avenue to Hiawatha Avenue, I absolutely agree with you that that's a different project and should be treated as such. I think this is different. I think there's a lot of learning going on here. When it comes to the technology and the budgetary piece of this, here's a little bit of irony, right? These are different. We look at them differently. However, when it comes to the budgetary piece of it, if we look at some of our recent scope changes, we have said retain the federal funds if those elements are being included in a different project. And that's essentially what's going on here with the arterial bus rapid transit projects, providing the technology piece that is critical for these mobility hubs. So that part of it, does somewhat align with our recent precedent when we've evaluated scope changes on other projects.
All right, and your observation as to why this was a non-issue at TAC? Because they usually analyze these things pretty carefully.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I think there just wasn't a lot of conversation at TAC.
Because of what you just mentioned, it was in the unique projects category.
Unique project.
Thus handled a little differently.
Yep, and understanding, the technical staff who are closer to delivering these projects, I think also understand the unique circumstances and contexts that come with each of these projects. Every project's different, and some of those issues that we run into are very unpredictable. And so I think there's some of that understanding as well at the technical staff level.
Okay, thanks. So question I had was for either Minneapolis staff or Member Chowdhury or Met Council staff. When this decision was made to move these two mobility hubs to different locations, at what level did that conversation take place? Because this is what I think Member Bradley's talking about is, where did the input and the decision-making take place? And what?
It became clear that, trying to site one of these on property that was not Minneapolis property was going to be a very big challenge. And so that was, fueled a lot of the decision-making to move locations for the Penn and Lowry one. For the one on 26th and Central, that one was just constrained right-of-way. It's very narrow sidewalks there. There's building right up to where the sidewalk is. There was almost no room to actually site a lot of the stuff there. And we became aware of the convenient Minneapolis parcel that we were able to segment off a portion of at 14th. And with the amount of development going on down there, it seemed to make a lot of sense, and that lined up a lot better with the BRT station too for an intermodal change point. And so we had discussions with our Public Works Administration on the decision to prioritize or to site them only on Minneapolis right-of-way or property, just so that we had better control over where we're going to put these elements. we relied largely on the community engagement that we had been doing for years throughout the process of running our mobility hub pilot. We had ambassadors on the field and done numerous community events. And so we had a pretty robust understanding of where people wanted to see mobility hubs from that. And we relied a lot also on our shared bike and scooter data to kind of cite these where they would best work as intermodal exchange points with the transit infrastructure. So.
And how about with respect to interaction with the council person that serves that district? Is there interaction with that person too?
At Penn Lowry?
Yes.
That's right. It was the council member's office that had, asked us to remove the parklet up there as part of the broader strategy for addressing public safety in that area. Yep.
Okay. All right. Just trying to get a little more background. And then Member Marino, and then back to Commissioner Jepson.
Thank you, Chair. More of a comment, not really a question. I just want to say thank you for your work and really still wanting to keep mobility hubs going forward, even if they're not permanent ones. But I do think it's important to recognize the difference between permanent and temporary, especially when we're thinking about putting permanent investment over South Minneapolis and temporary investment over North. I used to live on 29th and James, right near that area, and that's an area where, the Aldi's just closed over there. There is a food desert in that area now. And when we have these discussions about, like, for example, BRT versus just a local bus, we think about the value of that from having permanent investment that people can rely on going forward. And I think that those things do drive investment. There's an importance to having a commitment to that community right there. And I understand that there are safety concerns, but I really want to think about how do we take that more as an opportunity of we have a space where we do have more eyes on the street versus less. How do we use a transit safety officer that's being hired? How do we use maybe trip officers from Metro Transit? How do we use community ambassador programs and things like that? Because I don't want this to be something where going forward we can't invest in an area that is either lower income or has high crime just because we have safety concerns and we don't want to put something permanent in there.
Thank you. Member Marino, Commissioner Jepson, then Member Geisler.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Very well spoken. One thing that's not sitting quite right with me, and for me, this is a really needed discussion, not just about your project, but all future projects and how they're decided and how we rate them and rank them and apply for them. So for me, when you just commented that you don't want that mobility hub there because you want it to be on city property, my concern is, was when the application was submitted, was it city property at that time? So you knew at that time it was not city property, and moving fast forward 2 years, you're wanting projects on city property. So the disconnect to me with that is again, very disappointing. And so just understanding that when you make these applications, I don't know who wrote the application, how it was determined of these locations, but if that's a criteria for your city, I mean, that should have been determined way before you even applied for this. So again, moving forward, lessons learned, I think for those of us applying for these projects, we really need to do our due diligence if it's city, county, state policy that we need to hold to.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Geisler, maybe the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, so all of the hubs will have EV charging at them, is that correct? Or EV car share type things?
Thank you, Board Member. No, they will not. Not all of the locations will have EV car share investment. It's site specific. So whatever modes are available in those locations. So for example, on the Metro Transit side, we're only doing EV car share at one of the locations that is budgeted for.
Okay. So the reason why I bring it up is investment in technology, as described under unique at the time that it was applied, as well as within the application itself, is a broad scope of technology. Adding anything there, it's not just digital signage. Digital signage is absolutely valuable, but we're still getting some technology. I think the question would be, are there of those 4 hubs that aren't getting it, are they getting zero technology improvement whatsoever?
Thank you, Member. The 4 hubs, so the 4 Minneapolis hubs, 3 of those have already had technology investment or will have in the construction period through the ABRT construction. So real-time signage, et cetera, all the amenities that Metro Transit would deliver. So it's not going to be totally void of technology on that side. It actually is going to have pretty much the specs of what was expected with the kiosks, which was originally the project application that I'm sure you all reviewed. But a lot of the builds for those are a little bit tough, and we can deliver it through a program that Metro Transit has going. And since we were a partner on the project, I think that's what drove that decision.
So that would be in some ways very similar to having a different project deliver the exact same value like we have done with other scope changes in similar ways. I guess my point being, technology comes in a lot of shapes and forms. That's why unique is really broad on the definition of unique, of technology, to allow ideas of things to change and also be responsive to needs. So just to address Member Jenkins' point, but yeah, I'm all for this.
All right, thanks, Member Geisler. Anything else? All right, we got a motion and a second on 2024-22. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approval of 2024-2022 in its recommended form, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. 2024-22 is approved in its recommended form. All right, thanks for that great discussion. Good things to think about as we work on the next solicitation, as Commissioner Holberg states. All right, on to 2024-26, and are you going to tag team with Mr. Barbeau on this one, or are you going to handle it?
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Barbeau tagged me in. He's in the wings if needed. This last item, members of the board, is an action to release the draft 2025 to 2028 TIP for public comment. So the requested action would release that draft from May 17th to July 1st to receive those public comments, at which time it will come back to this board for final review.
Questions for the chair? All right. Is there a motion to approve 2024-26, which would release the tip for public comment?
I'll move it, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner, thank you.
Second,
Commissioner, thank you. The motion is second on 2024-26. Discussion. Member Martinson?
Yeah, I would like to propose an amendment before we release it for public comment. So the TIP is largely an administratively required document that's in many ways primarily a compendium of the federally funded projects in the metropolitan area. Yet it's also supposed to reflect the priorities in the metropolitan planning area. And to the extent that it makes no mention of state or metro goals for reductions in vehicle miles traveled or greenhouse gas emissions, particularly those associated with capacity expansion projects, to meet climate sustainability goals, it seems like it's missing that priority. And I think that it could be handled very briefly, I think, in this version of the TIP. I'd like to see it handled more extensively in the next iteration of the TIP, but I would like to move that there's a particular location in the document that I've already noted to staff where we could just include some language saying, starting on February 1st, 2025, Minnesota Statute 161.178, Transportation Greenhouse Gas Emissions Impacts Assessment will be in effect and will apply to any projects not currently included in the TIP that proposed for amendment into the 2025-2028 TIP and inclusion in future TIPs.
All right, and you've discussed that with staff?
Yeah, but I'm making the motion formally here.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but just so that for backgrounding purposes, and did you get any comment from your proposal from staff?
So it was noted that in fact next year's TIP would be more thoroughly revised with respect to what will have then been accomplished with the TPP and the 2050 plan. And it was also noted that we could handle such an amendment here either as an appendix, but I suggested that the appendix was less appropriate than another section of the document that looked to me like it would be a very well-suited place to add that brief statement of fact.
Let's see if we've got a second, and then we can have some more discussion on it. All right. All right, Linda Key seconds, Member Linda Key, and now Commissioner.
Thank you. So the legislative session is not over. There's that section is being amended and working on as we speak. I guess I would resist putting it in at this point and then sending it out for comment. We have the authority to amend it before we approve the final and would have more time to be able to reflect on what is actually in law at the end of session. And certainly, we'll take the comments as it's out for comment, and then we're the ones that approve the final version. And so we'd be more informed about what the actual law will look like when it is implemented in February of 2025. It also would give this body more time to reflect on what you would propose to include rather than today when we're half hour behind schedule and don't have it in writing. And I mean, I get where you're going, but we don't even know what that chapter law is going to look like
Thanks,
at this
Commissioner.
point.
It's a helpful procedural observation. Member Geisler, and then I'm going to get Member Barbeau or Mr. Barbeau up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would counter that the best time to put something like that in would be during the public comment period. The law can change next year too, and the year after that, and the year after that. So I guess I would support some mention, whether it's a specific language or not, of the fact that we do have a greenhouse gas emission type target coming out, that it's being considered, it is being looked at, we have these things out there. It is a salient point to say that the TIP should reflect those goals in some way, shape, or form, so that the public is aware that that is a real thing. Also, getting feedback from the public about that might be beneficial in a lot of other ways. We don't have to commit it at the final statement if we decide that it's a not good ad. I would counter that as we can always pull it back later. So I would rather put it in, get public comment and feedback on it, and then versus shove it in later when we think we know what it'll be, even though that law could change again the following year.
Commissioner Jepson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was thinking exactly what Commissioner Holberg was very well stated. I totally agree that something needs to be included. I think it's very premature to do that when things are being worked on. And as all policymakers understand, it is so much more difficult to take something out than to put something in. I think I absolutely will support your motion, Member Martinson, in the appropriate time when the legislation is over. We know what we're working with. We're okay with what we're working with. But until that time, I just do also agree with Commissioner Holberg. It's just a little too soon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Barbeau, can we ask you a quick question? Member Marino first, and then just stand by.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just kind of wanted to follow up on what Member Geisler was saying. Just going through the 2050 TPP, I learned a lot from reading that. And there are going to be people who are doing during this public comment period who may not know that this legislation is coming forward. And so to be able to have it specifically referenced, where that law is, that can influence them to say, okay, I'm going to learn more about this and be able to, provide a more informed comment of what's going forward, maybe contact their legislatures about, changing certain language or something if, it's still in that appropriate time. And so I really would support adding it at this point. And if something does change before the end of the session, like was said, we still have that opportunity to change it to reflect the new language coming forward.
Thank you, Member Marino. Mr. Barbeau, in the circumstance where we left the document as is and held off on what Member Martinson's proposing, but we wanted to get public comment if after the session ends, we deem it appropriate to do so if we agreed then to amend the TIP to incorporate this information into the TIP and whatever appropriate language, whatever the appropriate language would need to be based on what happens at the legislative session, could we still send that out for public comment in its amended form?
Mr. Chair, I tend not to think so. Certainly not as part of the 45-day public comment required of the TIP. One thing that could happen, and as somebody with no insight into the legislative process, I'm not sure when this will play out, but we do have a public meeting scheduled in late June. We could talk about this as an item we're considering putting language in and take people's feedback, but I wouldn't give it its own special comment period.
Yeah, I know. Okay, thanks for that. Commissioner Holberg.
Well, and just real briefly, we can't have a document that violates state law. Like, so if it's gonna have to reflect whatever is in state law. I mean, so some kind of innocuous kind of statement that we're gonna follow state standards or whatever. I mean, I don't know that that's controversial, because you gotta do it.
Did you find anything controversial about the language proposed by Member Martinson did you talk with him about it?
Mr. Chair, no, I don't know that we actually ironed out language. And so one request I would have is that, we get a sense of what a motion might be, and at a staff level, we interpret that because we are releasing this for public comment tomorrow. So Brian, you might refresh me if you had some specific language. I don't think that had been ironed out, but I didn't have any concerns per se, as somebody that just acknowledged that I'm not entirely on top of what's happening with legislation.
Member Martinson, would you read your language again for everybody, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to do so, but before I do that, I'd like to note a couple things. So first of all, the language that I'm proposing, so the law that is currently in place is not up for repeal in the current session. There are things that are being changed about it. None of those are details that I speak to with the language that I'm asking to be included in the tip. So it is the law of the land currently, and I think that would be appropriate to note in the tip, just in the same way that it's appropriate to note in the TPP that these are the priorities that our state is moving towards, that our region is moving towards. We have greenhouse gas goals that have been established by the governor and by the legislature. So I'm not asking for the inclusion of anything that's up in the air. And I think I tried to frame it in such a way that it just stated, this is what is, these are priorities for our region and our state going forward, that we have greenhouse gas emissions goals we're trying to meet. And I think that's 100% appropriate to have it's called the Transportation Improvement Plan. Having that language in there is, how are we going to improve our transportation system going forward? Well, these are some of the criteria against which we're going to judge the changes to that transportation system. So the language that I was proposing was actually, I think I might have gotten from you, Joe, was noting the fact that starting on February 1st, 2025, under Minnesota statute existing 161-178, transportation greenhouse gas emissions impact assessment will be in effect and will apply to any projects not currently included in the TIP, proposed for amendment into the 2025-2028 TIP and inclusion in future TIPs. So it's just noting the existence of that legislation and its intention, and noting that we have greenhouse gas and VMT reduction goals that we are working towards as part of our transportation improvements.
Mr. Chair, he's right. I think I did write that.
I like to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, Commissioner Karwoski.
I really can't support this amendment. I think to bring the amendment the day before we're going to post it publicly, I would rather see something like this in the packet with proper background information to digest it. And I think we'll get comments about greenhouse gases and things like that without putting in comments about law. So I'm not sure really what it accomplishes, but the main point is that I just don't like it. I'd like to know more about something like this, so I won't be supporting it. We'll be supporting the release of the tip for public comment, but hopefully the amendment's a separate vote.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few notes. If you do approve this, we'd probably want a little bit of flexibility to look at the text just as written to make sure it kind of fully reflects the language in the law currently. One of them that it only applies to state trunk highway projects, certain types of capacity projects, and Mr. Martinson knows all this too, but if you do approve it, I think we'd ask for maybe just a little bit of grace in looking at the exact language and running it by the exact law as written. So.
Commissioner?
Well, and I mean, your language says it applies to all projects and then put in the 2025. I mean, there's exceptions if you're already in engineering status. I mean, there's another number of elements in the law currently that are also being discussed to be amended. I mean, a reference to the state policy goals and a more generic thing, but does this have to be released to the public? Can we progress this for a month and we have language in front of us? And, I mean, it's really on the fly and it matters, and I mean, I can't support it, and being so prescriptive and not having it in writing and being a half hour behind schedule and.
Thank you, Commissioner. So what I hear you saying, Mr. Peterson, is that when we vote on the amendment, the proposed amendment, if the proposed amendment passes, you want that to go to the TAC before we even vote to release the TIP in its amended form, assuming we approve the TIP in its amended form for public comment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think I'm not sure it'd have to go back to the TAC. We have several members of our staff that are fully ingrained in this process and the session law, and we're meeting on it weekly, really. So I think we would just want a chance to review the language, if approved, before it would go out for public comment.
Just tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
But my understanding was from this little colloquy we had here that Joe is the one who created the language.
It just became circular here a little bit, yeah. So maybe it came from Joe, and I think we would just want to review it one last time, just to make sure the clarity is there before we release it for public comment. But I think that.
Well, how can we vote on releasing it?
We don't know what it says.
You can't.
Yeah, all right. So, Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to sort of reiterate that if we're concerned about the language and we're this close to it going out to public comment and to the end of the legislative session, I think it would make sense that something like this could be brought in as part of the public comment part of it, so it can be revisited to see whether it gets added when we actually approve the TIP. I know with the TPP, we have reference to the greenhouse gas legislation, but we've been intentionally vague because it's still changing. Like, there are still things, because the group that was coming up with sort of the process and how to look at it is still in process. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't just find something too tightly there that was going to be led somewhere else down the road. And I think that's similar to the discussion we're having here. It wasn't to ignore it, it was just we couldn't prescribe something when we didn't have all the facts at the end of the day. And when we're talking such tight timelines, I think it makes a lot of sense if they're not completely sure about the language yet that goes in, doesn't mean it doesn't get added. It just means that it comes in as a public comment and we revisit it later.
Thank you, Member Barber. Member Martinson, I see you looking at your computer, I'm thinking that you're thinking about alternative language that might be more general in scope, that speaks to greenhouse gas reduction efforts by the state, that we'd want the TIP to be consistent with whatever the state is doing from a greenhouse gas reduction standpoint.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually looking at the section of the TIP that I was proposing to put the language into to see what the current form of the statements are that are included in that section. And so this is under Section 2, Regional Plan and Priorities. And what's currently discussed there is conformity to the Clean Air Act requirements and Thrive MSP 2040. So I didn't realize that we were that close to having to release this to the public when I made this. I did propose this to staff behind the scenes to try to expedite this to the extent possible, but knowing it would be an action item today. So given the concerns that I hear around the table, I kind of doubt we're going to have the votes to pass my amendment. So I will withdraw my amendment with the understanding that it will come back. It will come back to this body, and I will commit to working further with staff on crafting language that would be appropriate at the right kind of level of vagueness, since we've discussed vagueness and intent earlier in the meeting today. So I formally withdraw my amendment.
Member Lindeke, you comfortable with that? All right.
I don't think we can, with Robert's rules, I think it has to be voted on.
Oh, because there's a second? Bill.
I'll never do it again.
I wish you'd been a little more vague. In that second. All right. All right. So we're going to vote on this proposed amendment. All those in favor of adoption of the proposed amendment from Member Martinson signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
The nays have it. The motion to amend fails, and now we're back to the main motion, which is 2024-26, which is the request by staff to release they have the tab release the draft 2025-2028 Transportation Improvement Program for public comment. Is there a motion on that?
It was already moved.
Do we have a motion, a second on that one already? Okay. All right. My memory's getting as bad as Barbeau's. All those, any further discussion on the main motion? All those in favor of adopting of 2024-26 in its recommended form, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, good. We'll have this conversation again. I think it's one that everybody's got a keen interest in. Okay, so Commissioner Holberg mentioned earlier, we're going to jump over to information now. We've had one meeting of this policymaker working group, which really is the next phase of the upcoming regional solicitation. As you might well guess, in that first meeting, we had a refresher course on the history of the regional solicitation and the current process that we're using, an overview of the regional solicitation evaluation process itself, discussion of evaluation goals, an update on peer review, and listening sessions that are being conducted as part of the evaluation and future project planning. Some of the questions that came up to ask peer agencies around the country in upcoming peer interviews were, according to the notes here, in my recollection as well, how are other MPOs around the country spending greenhouse gas reduction money? How are they allocating carbon greenhouse gas reduction funds? Same question, really, in a different form. How are other regions addressing emerging themes such as resiliency? How are other regions balancing suburban, urban, and rural requirements or needs, and specifically where rural and urban areas are very close in proximity? What are some of the other agencies' guiding principles, their regional vision, their regional solicitation process? How do they interact with each other? And then with respect to our own region, are there going to be changes in the regional solicitation evaluation goals? And whether there are or there aren't, we need to be thinking about coordinating our regional solicitation evaluation goals with the updated TPP and also with the 2050 Regional Development Guide that the council is putting together. So other suggestions and questions to consider during the evaluation included the solicitation should express a clear intent on where to spend money and why it's important to fund the particular projects. The overall regional benefit issue always is seeming to be there. The solicitation should clearly explain why certain data points are critical for application performance. Some categories have very high scoring criteria. Why do they matter so much? And make sure all the metrics are valuable and help achieve goals. We've had conversations around that as well. And then I think, frankly, this conversation around the future of transportation is one that it keeps sticking in my mind is I feel like we need the time to have a conversation here with all these bright minds we've got on the tab. What do we see as the future of transportation? And what are some of the things that we should be thinking about as a tab to push ourselves? When you think about transportation infrastructure, and we think about more effectively and efficiently moving people and goods, and as we look around the world, we see other places that are doing it better. There's new technologies coming. We haven't really had a chance to even discuss, much less embrace some of those. And it just seems like we've got a great group to have some of those conversations. And I'm thinking of the conversation we had around study money versus projects, with the small H Hyperloop, looking at this magnetic levitation system that could move people and goods between here and Rochester in 15 minutes. Are these some of the things that we want to be thinking about, or creating new categories for study monies like the federal government might do? So those are some of the things that came up in that first meeting, and we'll be continuing that process and keeping you informed. One issue we may have a membership replacement that we want to deal with, and more on that later with our own group. So That's kind of it from a policymaker work group standpoint, from an update for all of you. And then I'm going to turn to Member Johnson to give us an update on the active transportation work group. Member Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Hovland. So we have met 4 times now for the Active Transportation Work Group. Our last meeting was on April 25th. We've set up a good cadence where we meet several weeks before TAB, so there's time for us to receive information back from TAB and then also bring things to TAB for the next month. Really, that's because of the interest of time. We have a lot of items to get through, which I'll cover really quickly because we're behind schedule here. But we do need to make sure we bring back our recommendations in a timely manner to TAB so that they can be talked through with staff, going through TAC, come back to TAB each month. So really the main thing we talked about in the meeting to begin with was the feedback that TAB gave to us about the regional solicitation. $15 million of the active transportation money was recommended to be spent in the regional solicitation. What we heard from TAB was that sounds like a good plan. There was a question about the geographic balance and how that matched up with geographic equity, which is actually in the language of the law. So we had a good conversation about what that actually means. We did actually take a look at, and I want to thank staff for this, brought maps to us of what the active transportation projects look like between both the active transportation funding itself and overall within the bike ped category. So that was very helpful to visualize geographic balance. I think there's still going to be an ongoing conversation about what does the legislation exactly mean with geographic equity, because it talks about communities that have been left out of the planning process and with projects. So that's definitely going to be something that for now, we won't have maybe the complete discussion on it, but we're definitely going to have a conversation about what does it look like for additional solicitations which are not part of the regional solicitation. So if it's separate or if it's something in tandem with the 2026 solicitation, it's definitely going to be a topic we're going to be talking about. What does that exactly mean? And then I do want to note just one thing that came up. So when the scenarios were built, one thing that came up was Minneapolis had 4 qualified projects. And one discussion point on that was, should this group take some sort of action about that? Because if it's a pilot, and that's where we're framing this for this particular year, there's a lot of projects going to one applicant. And so Minneapolis did turn back 2 of those projects to federal. So those dollars were used on other projects, which means I don't know the exact number. Maybe Mr. Peterson can say when you come up talking about the scenarios, but some additional number of projects now are going to be in the active transportation pilot, more than 2. So we're going to have more projects, better spread, more instances to really trial run everything going forward. So that's like a good move. So there's no actual action taken by the work group on that. So again, we're going to be spending time talking about the requirements of the law itself. And one other stumbling block we came across is one requirement is for complete streets planning. It needs to be something that's already in place with the applicant. So one concern that came up was some applicants don't have streets. So how would they have a complete streets program? So we're going to be spending time talking about some of those exceptions that maybe, do they partner with a city or county that does have one, some of those pieces. And again, these are things that we are going to be talking about as we think about our own solicitation. What does that look like either in 2025 or 2026? And then really the last couple items are pretty short on this one. One piece of information that's come up through TAC, which we have not talked about at our meeting for the work group, but will at the next meeting. There was a request from TAC about potentially adding more money than 15 million. So we'll have a conversation about that. In our meeting number 4, the prior one, we really did feel comfortable with 15 million, but we'll see how many projects get covered here in just a moment when Mr. Peterson is up here to discuss that. And then the last item that we have on here is we have a lot of work to do on what is going to be going forward past 2024 with our regional solicitation process. So is that going to be in tandem for 2026, 2025, if we do our singular one-off? That's going to be an immense amount of work. And so the one piece that we have narrowed down a little bit is we won't be able to go from scratch is probably the best way to put this. We would have to either borrow what the regional solicitation does already in 2024, maybe with some small tweaks, or potentially we're looking at MnDOT's active transportation funding program as well to see if there's anything that we could use there. But fundamentally, there's just not enough capacity to do a fully standalone, fresh, from the ground up program just for 2025. It's just too short a timeline for that. So we're going to be spending time talking about those pros and cons in our next meeting, bringing those recommendations back to TAB in June or July going forward. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Yeah. Questions for Member Johnson? All right, good. Thanks for that update. All right, now we are going back to these 2024 regional funding, regional solicitation funding scenarios, and Steve Peterson's going to lead us through this, and then we're going to try to cover the last couple topics that Amy Venowitz is covering from a transportation funding standpoint. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairs. So how much time would you like to go on this one? Just get a matter of timing from you. We have this.
That's a great question. Amy?
I'm always here.
Yeah, I was thinking, Ulrich's not here, Commissioner Ulrich's not here, so, you know, he's the one who wanted all this information from you and primed the pump, so. We could hold you off till next time. So Steve, I think this is important work. We wanted to have a little bit of time. And I'd like to get folks out of here at 2:30, so.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. And the third information item too, we can push to on the scope change. So today's is an information item. So again, we're going to be asking you to make an action at the July meeting. So you've got a few months to look at this and have it sink in the different projects and where you'd like to go with it on the solicitation. So last month we came to you with the first $200 million. We called that the base scenario. That is something that we built off of, so that's not something you can choose or not choose. That was just the first bit of money. Since then, we've got direction from you on active transportation and the carbon reduction from the council, and so we've added in the rest of the money and developed scenarios that we had talked about, the 3 scenarios last time. And we'll go through those today. The first is the midpoints, so that distributes the money based on the midpoint of those modal funding ranges, so 55.5% for roadways, 30% for transit and TDM, and 14.5% for bicycle and pedestrian. And that's out of $247 million. The midpoint safety is similar in nature. It does fund one additional roadway reconstruction project and that had high monetized crash reduction benefits. So that gets you one more large roadway reconstruction project. And in doing so, you would lose 2 small transit projects and 2 TDM projects. So that's the give and take and the trade-offs between those two. So the good news is the top scoring projects across all of these funding scenarios are all going to get funded. There's 4 to 6 projects that are different between the scenarios, depending on where you want to go. Lastly, the bike ped heavy, what that does is shift $15 million of additional funding to the bicycle and pedestrian modal area. And so again, that takes away the same 2 transit projects, 2 TDM projects, and then in addition, the roadway spot mobility and the roadway reconstruction project. So it takes away those 6 projects, and what you get for that is 4 additional multi-use trail projects and 1 ped project. And that's all detailed. You don't have to remember all that. It's all detailed in the staff analysis. So those are the 3 scenarios, and they're color-coded. And we'll go through those today. Then in addition to that, we did add just over $15 million of active transportation. So that's not included in the modal funding ranges for bike ped. So it was meant to supplement what was already funded. So we went above and beyond and added $15 million across all the funding scenarios. So all in, it's about $263 million, $247 of the federal funds, and then $15 million or so of the active transportation regional sales tax. Don't need to go through all of these today, but it is helpful to kind of look back on to trying to understand what's going on. First point, and we talked about this last month a little bit, is that there's more money in the midpoint for transit than there is project requests. So in the first scenario number 1, we fund every transit project in transit expansion, transit modernization, and in the TDM category. So, and we're still left with $7.7 million. The other 2 scenarios don't fund all the way down those lists. And so you can see that moving forward, but scenario number 1 funds every transit project. Scenarios 2 and 3 don't fund the bottom projects. So we overprogrammed by by 10%. So there is a little runway there. If you do want to spend some more money to get an additional project and get up to what we funded the last time, about 10 to 12%, you could do so. But this time went about 10%, which is $25 million. Lastly, we do have the HSIP program also going on, and the scoring committee meeting for that was actually today. So a lot of people, at least on the technical side, have been wondering what are the results of the HSIP funding, which is about $15 million per year. And we will have that for you next month, the two categories for HSIP. Next, before we go over to the actual funding scenarios, we did bring this to the TAC earlier this month. And one thing the Active Transportation Group asked of the technical folks was to do a deep dive into active transportation, how we did it, how staff distributed those funds. And so that's why a lot of the feedback was related to active transportation, because we did get that request from the Active Transportation Work Group. So a few things that they said, and I'll ask Chair Hager if she wants to add anything here too, from what was probably a 60 to 90 minute conversation. Several members expressed support for a simple grants management process. So now we have 14 projects that we're funding or proposed to fund with active transportation. So those applicants are requesting a simple process to distribute the money versus the federal process. We received a few comments about going further down the bicycle pedestrian list. That could be either done with more active transportation dollars, which is going to be brought to the group, Active Transportation Work Group, for consideration in the near future, or you could overprogram by a little bit, or you could do a little bit of both. But we did receive a few comments about funding more in bike ped, or you can kind of change the way we've set up the scenarios. And then lastly, we got strong support from the technical members about a simple application moving forward. So not the decision point here in July, but moving forward with active transportation. Members from the technical committee wanted a simple application and thought that this would do a few things. One, it would open up to more applicants, especially cities that maybe are intimidated by going through the federal process or the regional solicitation process, and could potentially help with geographic balance and spreading those sales tax dollars around the region. So I'm going to turn to TAC Chair Hager and see if she wants to add anything.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I think what I would do is clarify maybe when TAC was asking for, more active transportation funding or getting more bike ped projects funded. What they were looking at is, in particular, the bike ped heavy scenario on the spreadsheet only gains you a few more multi-use trail projects. It looks the same in pedestrian facilities. It looks the same in safe routes to school. But if you look at some of the other categories, you're going down the list in spot mobility. You're going down the list in some of the other roadway categories. And so are those contributing to a bike ped heavy scenario, or should we have been focusing going down the list further, especially multi-use trails, and kind of reflecting back on the conversation that you all had when we look at how those scores look going down the list, and it being a very gentle curve in multi-use trails and being a little bit more of a sharp cliff in some of the other categories. So I just wanted to kind of clarify when we talk about the active transportation funding and the pilot and what TAC's position, or it wasn't even a position because it wasn't a vote, but some of the commentary and the discussion that we had, that's what we were looking at.
Thank you, Chair Hager.
Good. Thank you. And now we're going to move over to the actual scenarios.
So Steve, before you start in on the actual scenarios, could you comment more broadly on what you want to hope to achieve this meeting and next meeting before we just make a decision in July?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the key items that we're going to be asking you, one, are the scenarios that staff has developed. Are they? Do you think there's something there that either between the scenarios, do you think, or would you like additional scenarios to consider? That would be one question. Question number two, what are things that you like within either of the three scenarios that are presented? Because as I said, we do have a little bit more money that we could put in, so you can, with only 4 to 6 projects that are different between the scenarios, if you like this portion of the way we did the roadways, this portion of the transit, this one for bike ped, then we can start thinking about, is there a way we can get some of the benefits and positives of a couple of different scenarios. So I think general feedback and general understanding of what's going on here is what we're seeking today. That do people understand kind of how we laid out the money, where the money's going, and make sure questions are answered.
No, right now, actually, after
Steve, hold off one more moment, Commissioner.
Yeah, I just want to make some of the comments after the initial summary that you did. First of all, I appreciate all the great work that you're putting into all of this and then working with all of us together to try to come up with something that's really fair and balanced. I just have some observations that I wanted to share. I've been going over this with Hennepin County staff, and there's concern about the scenarios and the midpoint safety and the bike ped heavy. They don't provide a significant deviation across each of the applications, citing the four categories experienced no deviations. Example, number of the applications are funded regardless of the funding scenario selected. So that's one observation. Okay. The other thing is the bike ped heavy scenario. Currently, this scenario gives significant preference to additional multi-use bike trail projects versus pedestrian facilities. And if we're looking at 0 deaths, that's pretty significant. And the safe routes to school piece, which is a big piece we keep working on, right? So you're just recommending maybe revisiting this as the bike ped heavy. It should provide more balance between the modes. So that's a comment.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Yep, we'll take that in consideration, and also maybe we'll work through some of those issues here as we go through. So thank you. Okay, we're just going to spend five or 10 minutes going through the scenarios, make sure people understand them. So again, the first column, base funding, is not a scenario. That was what we brought to you last month, but just so you can see kind of how we're building out the options here and the $263 million. Every project that is color-coded would be funded by tab. And so and you'll see a number for how much their funding request was and how much they're funded in each case is whatever the full request was. So the three scenarios are 3 columns. You can see that midpoint safety is number 2, and 3 is bike ped heavy. And there are a few other annotations showing the safety high score, safety pedestrian high score, and if it's an equity bonus project. So those are in the applicant column. You'll see that, and you'll maybe wonder why is there a hashtag here or a star here. Elaine, you want to add something too?
I wanted to add, when you're talking about the bike ped heavy, what that means is it's up to the top of the modal range.
Yep.
So you could only add a few more projects to get to that top. So just.
Yep, good point. And the top of that range is 20%. So we took 20% of $247 million, and that's how we came up with the bicycle pedestrian heavy, plus added the $15 million from active transportation. So first in the roadway categories, you can see traffic management technologies, and in all the scenarios we're showing that both of those projects, both high scoring projects are funded. Spot mobility and safety, again, these are smaller projects, particularly roundabout projects. And as I scroll down, there is some deviation here. And particularly the midpoint and midpoint safety are funding one more project down on that list to get to number 9 instead of number 8. So that's one difference that I'll point out. Strategic capacity, here's where you start seeing some different colors here, and had several questions on what do the colors mean, and that's the orange in this case is the protect funding. So again, that's resiliency funding. And so we asked all the applicants for eligible project costs that would meet resiliency. Again, that's stormwater management, erosion control, those types of project elements. And the Highway 13 project submitted by the city of Burnsville had far and above the number of eligible costs compared to anyone else. So it had the most eligible costs. Also being along the Minnesota River had a very good response. So we put, across all the scenarios, we put the protect money there, and thought that was a good decision to put it there. Now, as we go down to roadway reconstruction, again, we have more projects funded here because there are more projects submitted. So that was one of the ways we looked at how far to go down these lists. And so in number 9, you'll see a green color. It's a Hennepin County project, and it's on Cedar Avenue, and that is carbon reduction funding. So the green is carbon reduction funding. One of the new funding sources is $15 million. And what we did was we have projects in both roadways, transit, and bike ped to use that carbon reduction money that we talked about last month with Chair Barber. And one question here, Mr. Chair. In the corner.
Go ahead, member.
Steve, just
Or Fahey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, on number 10, the Carver project, Highway 5 and 41, it's our understanding that MnDOT has already killed that project. And so can we continue to ask for the funding?
You got incoming.
How could you kill a project by the Arboretum? Beautiful Arboretum. You know, it's a regional project. Where do those rumors start?
That's just.
We're fully supportive of that project.
Thank you.
Carver County has been a great partner with us to help us deliver that, so.
So we would still accept it. It's the 10 million, but if we have to do a scope change later, is that doable?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, you're saying that if the design as proposed changes, that might trigger the scope change like you saw with Metro with the mobility project, mobility hubs today. Correct, yep. So the roadway reconstruction, there's a few different we go down the list, I guess, in each case, a little bit further down with the number 2, the safety one going further down, that catches a Hennepin County project on Cedar Avenue. And the reason we used that money in the safety theme was because that project had a high crash reduction benefit in looking at the numbers.
That was the base funding.
That would be that was number 11 on that roadway reconstruction list. Yep. Lastly on roadways is bridges. And you may remember there was a target of $10 million for bridges. And in this case, that puts us in between funding 1 or 2 projects. We've, in the draft scenarios here, shown funding the top 2 projects. And so that amounts to just about $12 million in total. So again, the target was $10 million. We funded it 2 projects at $12 million at this point. Then as we move to the next slide into the transit categories, here's what I was talking about on, we had more money in the transit area than projects submitted. So for the midpoint scenario, we fund all of the projects, and you can see that shown in number 1, midpoints showing all 5 transit expansion projects, all 4 transit modernization projects. But that's not true in the other 2 scenarios. Green shows up again here too, and again, that was carbon reduction. That would go to an MVTA project, which is number 3 in transit modernization. As we scroll down here, the other big transit investment is the arterial BRT. So that's the H line that was submitted by Metro Transit. The maximum there again was up to $25 million for a project, and so that is being shown under arterial bus rapid transit. The last little part for transit and TDM is the TDM funding. Again, some of that money is going to be set aside for future. So we've got a TMO set aside for the amount of $5 million, and then we've set aside $1.2 million to be selected 2 years from now. And then lastly, travel demand management. Again, you already set this money aside back in 2022. And now you're using that $1.2 million on projects, and we were able to get all 5 projects in the midpoint, and then 3 of the 5 projects in the other 2 scenarios. Maybe, Mr. Chair, as you're fumbling through your papers, maybe we'll pause here and see if people have questions, if others need a break here. No?
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, good presentation. If I heard was going to give a copy, but I took a pause when you said, what are you looking for when the chair is here? You're looking for some direction, some opinion on, okay.
Yes, yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mine is, at least from Washington County perspective, the midpoint safety is, and then because it adds a lot of additional safety points over last year. And then scenarios 1 and 2. And, we're not addressing, the problem I'm bringing up is within 1 and 2, out of our county, and I don't know about your counties, but we only had 1 city apply. We have about 40 cities. It's too expensive to apply the time. So scenario 1 and 2 does include one of our cities. It's the only application. So when I'm looking at this, it's hard not to try to provide some geographical balance. And I think an action item is to look at the application process. That's a different topic, but.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good feedback there. So if I were to summarize that, it was a preference for scenarios 1 and 2, a general preference. And we're
Midpoint safety and then.
okay, gotcha.
Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So on the one scenario where you take away the one transit project, it's an MVTA project to run a circulator between Dakota County Technical College and the Apple Valley Service Station on Cedar. And Dakota County funded a pilot in like 2020, I think.
Okay.
And we actually had to pull it early because there was like virtually no ridership. The subsidy per rider was either $68 or $88 each way. And so when I get called Elaine, when I saw this on the list, to say, what is the standard for performance, or if we've done this in recent years, so I know MVTA is not going to want to give up a project, but if that's not funded, they already have 6 projects totaling over $17 million. This would be the 7th project. And so do we have, in that situation where it's just been tried in recent years and didn't work, is there a way to plug that into the decision-making process, or?
Chair, I could.
Yep.
I did reach out to MBTA to ask, for the project sponsor who submitted it, and she did send me some more information, which we can provide. So the project is different than what was done before. So there is an existing route out there, and they will be extending that route plus adding stops. So that's why it's a full expansion. So it's extending beyond an existing route, and they are currently, I'm just going off memory, also have their Connect service is providing dial-a-ride to the Dakota County. So they had ridership there that's been increasing. But I can, yeah, she did, so they do have some more information on that, so I can share that.
I guess from a Dakota County perspective, at the risk of ticking off MVTA that provides service in a portion of the county, we have both Metro Transit, MVTA, and outside the transit taxing district in our county, so we have kind of a mixed bag. The fact that you would add the project, the County Road 46 project would get funded. That is a project that is right near the new data center, hundreds of new homes in Rosemont, truck routes. I mean, it's a safety hazard. It's past due in being done, so.
Yes.
I thank you. I appreciate Elaine's comments and for reaching out to MBTA staff. And we need to distinguish between what was attempted before that the county funded and this broader project. And if we need more information on that to explain it, we'll try to get that.
Yes, they did send me, it was like a 2-page summary of all the changes of this project, the elements of this project, so.
Yeah. Well, and Mr. Chair, I mean, I appreciate that, but when I look at the amount of projects already funded for MVTA. I'm just saying the trade-off for Dakota County, getting funding for the road that had the worst safety of all the applications in the bunch, as a trade-off, Dakota County would support that.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. One of the things I've been thinking about is on this transit category. We've been getting reports from Suburban Transit and from Deb on Metro Transit operations. And I think we're all trying to figure out what's the future of transit in a post-COVID world. And we know that ABRT is the best performer in this post-COVID world. But it's been kind of begging the question for me of, if we're just doing what we've always done here without thinking about the future of transit in a post-COVID world, are we allocating money the right way? Or should we be having a better data backgrounding and understanding of what's going on with transit and what the transit experts are thinking is going to happen with transit before we decide, or as part of the process of evaluating how to spend the money we have on transit? Mayor.
I've been looking at this and thinking about this, and I'm just wondering if some of our transit, we're thinking the wrong way. We've worked so hard on transit in the inner rings, and yet the suburbs are growing like crazy. So all of a sudden, if they came out of the inner rings and going outside, where they've been used to transit and going outside and there's nothing there, maybe we should be looking at trying to create some more bus service to the outer suburbs so that people that have grown used to that have that ability. Right now, that's not, in many places, it's not available. And maybe we're just looking at it wrong. Maybe we need to look at it, reverse it, put more transit to the outside to bring it in, because there is a lot of availability, and I know that will make some people happy, but there's way more transit availability inside than there is on the outer suburbs. I don't know.
Yeah,
just
I mean, and we also hear about, cars are getting more and more expensive. It's difficult for people to move around, and so, and maybe this is a conversation in our next policy maker group, but.
It's the performance standard thing. We don't know, I mean, you say you want more buses in the suburbs. I have never seen a fixed route MVTA bus in Dakota County with more than 3 people on it in years. And the red line bus passed over Cedar Avenue on my way up here today, completely empty. I mean, where are the documents that say what's the average number of people on a bus per hour in these different routes? We have routes that are packed, need more room, and then in what I see is a whole lot of empty buses. I think the Connect service is, and so, I mean, I look at these pilots, the zoo, a friend of mine used to ride the route that stopped at the zoo. She said she hated that bus because it took so much time to get off, go to zoo, and get back. And not one person ever got on or off at the zoo on this route. And so, we can fund these pilots, but do we let $5 million run? Or do we say a year into the pilot, if it's not performing?
No.
I mean, we know 2 years, 3 years, a road's gonna work. We know people will be there, but when we fund some of these, I don't know. But I just feels like there's never a performance standard. And at one point, the Red Line had a higher per passenger subsidy than the North Star did. And it was 7 miles long. And what is North Star, 46 miles or something? And that wasn't per passenger mile, it was per passenger. So.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Jepson and then Member Marino.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you opened up a bit of can of worms right now. So I hope you don't have anywhere to go for the next few hours. No, I sincerely appreciate you bringing this up because I think things need to be reworked. And to go to the mayor's comments and to go to the commissioner's comments, yes, we need to rethink of what we how we define transportation, how we define transit, how we define bike ped. There's a really great article in the Star Tribune on Monday regarding bike and trails, because this is National Bike Awareness Week, I think is the name. And the suburbs have some phenomenal bike trails, but they're for recreation, they're not for transportation. And so realigning our ranking systems and our thinking about what bike trails, roadways, sidewalks for transportation, not recreation, I think is key to rewiring our thinking. And regarding Commissioner Holberg's point, I just wanted to take a shout out to Member Barber and Charles, so for giving me very specific information on ridership, on miles of, or stops and locations for transit in the outer ring. Because when you actually look at the data, actually look at the percentage of opportunities for transit in the suburbs in the 5 collar counties, it pales in comparison to what's existing in the metro. And so it is impossible to make headway on transit in the suburbs if the infrastructure doesn't exist. That's why I really supported Member Martinson's comments during the Active Transportation Committee meeting about using dollars for planning and design and pilot programs and things like that. So when we have the data based on stops and usage and things like that, where does it make the most sense based on that data, which thank you, Charles, for providing that to me so we can make very good decisions on how we are redefining transportation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Marino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just kind of wanted to address a little bit on with bus rapid transit having growth, but local routes not having in the same level. I looked at the ridership numbers that was presented on Monday's Transportation Committee, and so local bus that is not bus rapid transit is still having 11% year-over-year growth so far. And so that is still, like, you look at many things, if you're seeing 11% growth, that's significant amounts right there. To respond to the point about there not being a lot of buses in the suburbs, there is Network Now happening currently, which is used to kind of decide what is going to be the future of service. And so I would encourage people who have concerns about transit, like transit allocation in the suburbs, to engage with that process and see what can be done over there. And one other point, I don't have the exact numbers, but I remember I looked at this previously, and while suburban transit is lower, it has kept about the same percentage of pre-COVID ridership on their local routes as the overall local routes in the city. Now, you're starting from a smaller amount, so you keep the same percentage, but you're still seeing that people are still loyal. People are still remaining and wanting to use a service, even with a lot of service cuts there. So I know we're kind of going off the rails, but I do appreciate the time for the comment.
Member Barber and then Mayor Winchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Member Marino, for pointing out a couple of things that I had on my list. There is still increasing ridership on many modes in transit. We do have to look at it differently. We do have a study ongoing for assessing post-COVID travel behavior and how transit is used. We will continue to do that because we know things have changed. And this is one of the reasons why I think, one thing I didn't mention in my report is, and this would be also, I think the suburban providers would agree with this, that one of the key things that's increasing is microtransit. Yeah. And that is a good way to see if there's ridership in certain areas. If you have a lot of riders going back and forth or with some of those shared services, where people are really moving to and from. And that is definitely something we're seeing within our service as well. And while the ABRT system definitely does a really good job, the heart of our system is local routes. Period. There are people who need to ride transit, don't have another option, and really are riding throughout the day. The biggest changes that we're seeing in transit ridership isn't not using transit, it's when people are using transit. You don't have a morning peak and a PM peak. You have things moving at different times of day. Usually later morning, you'll see a little more of a peak. We're also seeing much higher ridership on weekends than we ever have seen historically. So people were building it into their day differently, which is why things like the ABRT system and microtransit that are a little more adaptable or on a high frequency, and even our LRT, high frequency, you know when it's coming, as people are building those steps into it. So I think we want to continue to look at how we invest into the transit system, but also continue to keep an eye, especially as we look at the next regional solicitation. I'm hopeful that we'll have a number of our answers known of, you know, are some of the things we see with the changes in the transit system permanent, or are they still, you know, people responding to kind of their post-COVID timing? I think we'll know more, and that should inform some of that, but I think that not directing some of the funds for transit in this cycle would be unfortunate because we're in a rebound phase. And I think all providers would agree with that, and rebound is important, and we're really not going to know what some of it means until we get these investments up and running.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor Winchell and then Commissioner Karwoski, then back to Commissioner Jepson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify, you know, after Member Holbrook's comment, I guess I'm saying bus service, not necessarily bus service to Minneapolis. The Southwest Prime is used, that's really used a lot and stuff like that. So just the ability to have service to move around. I mean, I think our goal right now is more about changing how we think in our driving habits. I've never grown up with a bus. It's just not in my thinking pattern. But I'm getting old and they're gonna farm me out pretty soon. But as more and more younger families are moving outside, you have to get them used to the idea of being able to use the transit system. But if there's nothing there, they're gonna grow up and be just like me, dependent upon a car. And that's why when you said about we maybe need to rethink, we do need to rethink. And the only way I think you gotta do that is we gotta start going to where the sources are about if people are growing to the outside, to the suburbs and not having the service, we'll never change it. Will always be where we're at, and we gotta start looking at how to do that. I'm not sure what that is. And I agree with Commissioner Holberg. A lot of the buses are driving around and they're empty. There's nobody on them. But we have to look at something new, which somebody in this creative world can probably come up with. It's not me, but I think we just need to relook at the whole process on how we do things.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Karwoski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with Mayor Winchell on we gotta really rethink how we do transit, and I think we need to do it quickly. I separate myself with Mark. I grew up on the east side of St. Paul. Bus downtown, you don't even need a bus schedule. It's what you'd call bus rapid transit. It was very successful. My dad took it to work every day. But I moved 8 miles east of there to Washington County. Our county is, in every county geographically long or odd shape. Ours is 44 miles long. So we need transit that, right now, we're putting spokes on the wheel, everything comes out of downtown St. Paul, Minneapolis. I have no problem with what's been built, but I think to make it more effective is we need to look at micro-transit in the whole 7-county area and redeploy the buses so that they go from county to county. The example would be in northern Washington County, it might go over to Anoka and then on to another county. In southern Washington County, Cottage Grove, it might go from Cottage Grove into Dakota County to the airport, all of America. We have nothing like that. In Hennepin, and this is not threatening to Hennepin and Ramsey, because you could go to Roseville to eat, all the northern suburbs of Ramsey County. In Hennepin, you could be going through Bloomington and Richfield. There's all sorts of those connections. We just can't deploy everything that has to go into the core cities. And we have to be innovative with the appropriate kind of small bus. Not everything's got to be a bus. So whatever we define microtransit, redeploy the bus lines to be more effective, and it would take time. So that's my 2 cents.
Yep, thanks, Commissioner. Back, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair and Mayor. So I think one of the first things we need to do is really, words matter. right? Words are very important. And I think when we use the term regional, certain individuals use it very, conveniently. When you talk about regional growth of 11%, that's not regional growth. That's not in my region at all. We still have park and rides that aren't open since COVID. That growth is in very specific areas that is very conveniently talked about as the region of growth. So I think in changing how we use the words, how we talk about transportation, and if we're gonna be regional about it, we need to embrace the region, but, and until we acknowledge that there are discrepancies in our thinking, it's not gonna change. So I really do also hope that, and I will give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'm sorry, I can't see your name, Marino, Member Marino, that you know that those of us who don't have a lot of transit are working very hard to get transit. We're not sitting on the sidelines. We are very active. We are very involved, and there's only so much we can do. So I hope you understand that it's not us just sitting back and complaining and talking, and we're trying to do what's best for our communities with the systems that are in place. So thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I had to comment on.
So when we make these decisions in July on how to spend $220 million, I want us to leave here feeling like we all did the right thing. We feel comfortable. We've made smart decisions, and that was kind of the reason I primed the pump with the conversation. And I'm not limiting it to just transit, but transit sticks with me because of some of the conversations I've had, these virtual conversations with some of these researchers where if only 65% of people are going to the office now, whether it's by transit or it's using a car, and more people are working from home and more people are doing hybrid, the world of how people move around and when they move around, to Member Barber's point, is changing. It's changed. And is how we spend this money reflecting the change that we're seeing? Or are we too early yet? Don't we know enough yet? And that's something that all of us that are working on this next solicitation, and the ideas around that should be pouring ourselves into, and we just rely on the same methodology here, and we do what we've normally done and make some choices on some good options. I mean, for the most part, some of the things are pretty straightforward, but there are these changing times and changing elements of how people move around, and goods get moved around that should be impacting our thinking some way, somehow. Anyway, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wrap this up here too. But I did want to just spend a minute or two on the active transportation. So that's the purple color you see. And so there is a column that says eligible for active transportation pilot. So this is what we've worked through with our work group. Again, that's smaller projects that can be delivered quicker and meet all the state legislative requirements. And so there's three categories here: multi-use trail with 35 applicants. And you'll see that's perhaps the one category across this whole solicitation that isn't getting as many projects funded. And the primary reason for that is because there's a lot of very expensive trail projects at the top of those lists. So if you look at the maximum award is $5.5 million. So good projects, but most of the money in bike ped is going to multi-use trails, but we're not getting many projects. And it's because they're expensive projects. So you can see the purple again is active transportation. Again, in total, we're funding 14 projects with active transportation. The question on geographic balance, that would go to 6 of the 7 counties would have a project. 13 of the 14 projects would be for a city would be the sponsor. The one county would be Dakota County in that, but 13 of the 14 would be cities. But then as we go further down this list, both pedestrian and safe routes to school, you can see we are funding the majority of those projects, and the reason is because they're less expensive. They're $2 million or less or $1 million or less, and that's where we can also get a lot of active transportation projects because that's the criteria that the work group brought forward to you last time. So that's maybe, and some of the comments we received too is in bike bed heavy, why didn't, we could have spent more money in pedestrian and safe routes to school and funded all of those projects. But we did put them further up here, so that's the big difference. If you want to go bike bed heavy, and that number 3, we are funding four additional projects in multi-use trail to just try and make a little dent into those 35 submittals. But ultimately up to you whether you want to fund out safe routes to school and pedestrian or do more of these trail projects. So there's other information in the packet. You can go through it at your leisure or next month, including we've mapped the projects. We've done geographic balance analysis to see over time who's getting how much money compared to population and employment and other factors. So a lot of good information in there, and we don't have to go through it all today, but this is really the first of several meetings. So sometimes it takes some time. We've got some comments from a few of the counties today, but probably not anything to move this way or that way on. But we'll continue the conversation is what I'm hearing here.
Okay. I want to thank all of you for sticking around.
Yeah.
Member Chowdhury.
Chair, just a point of clarification. This is my first regional solicitation, and so this is a lot to absorb. Wanted to understand where are other opportunities to give feedback after today's presentation, and how should members submit that?
How can they get feedback or give feedback?
Give feedback.
Yeah, to Steve, to staff, to Elaine.
Just directly.
Yeah.
Will there be opportunities to give comments at the next TAB meeting?
So at the June TAB meeting, it'll also be more discussion information, and in July will be the decision.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and the last 2 items we're going to hold. Thankfully, everybody. Thanks for your attendance. Anybody have anything to go to the order? Member DeGan?
I don't know if anyone noticed, but Mr. Peterson is now a celebrity. He was profiled and spoke on bicycle trails in Roseville on KSTP last night. And I understand he has Mike McCartney for his agent. Those who don't know, that's Kirk Cousins' agent. So 180 million is coming your way.
Another barge hit a bridge in Texas and dropped.
Use that word, when you use that word profile, that was getting nervous.
Is there still a meeting on June? Still a meeting in June?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, we stand adjourned.
Because Juneteenth.
Yeah.